CDs. Okay, there it is, video over, and as my viewer retention continues to drop, let me just say that retro technology, there's like a new interest in it. I guess it's never really gone away, but because of the way that modern tech has now become even more slopified, there's even more of a new interest in revisiting old technologies, because even though old tech wasn't perfect back then either, at least a lot of it has held up way better compared to, something that needs an internet or subscription service. Like, this was made in 85 and it still works. 1985 with technology from 1982 and it still just works. So yeah, if I had to choose one retro technology, it would probably be physical media, and more specifically CDs, because you really can't go wrong with the compact disc. It was made to play music, and after all this time, it still continues to play music. Now, there's a lot of different formats out there. There's also, of course, DVDs, cassettes, VHS, Laserdisc. But generally, I guess with the exception of DVDs, because it's similar to this, the other formats, as awesome as they are, if you're just starting out with using retro technology, there's just a lot more, things you need to know about it, and more specifically, chances are, with the players becoming older and older every day, you also need to know how to work on them. But with something like the CD, you just need to get like any old standard DVD player, CD player, I guess even Blu-ray player would work just fine with the compact disc. So if you're just starting out with using retro technologies, the advantage of a CD is that, well, you can still easily get a lot of different albums. Now, I have some older titles here, but you can still get new song releases on CD. They are still being manufactured, and yeah, this is quite the selection, I know. But the point is that you can get a lot of different titles easily, and the thing with CDs is that they've been around for a long time. So all the issues that they've had back in the early 80s, for the most part, it's a pretty fail-proof system. All you have to do is just get a CD, take the CD, and put it into the player, and it just works. There's no DRM, or at least, with a standard CD, it doesn't need an internet connection, it doesn't really need anything extra. So if you're going from modern technology, say a streaming service, or just even a modern smartphone, and you want to experience older technology, physical media has definitely got to be one of the easiest ways to experience older tech. And even though there are some discs out there which are completely scratched up, this is an album from 1993, and as you can see, it's still in really good condition. And in fact, if we go back to Phil Collins here with No Jacket Required, this was also released on a variety of other formats at the time, such as an actual record or even cassette. But again, keep in mind, this is a disc from 1985 and it's still in really good condition. So even though it may not be as easy to go out and just buy a brand new copy like this nowadays. I mean, actually, they might even make new versions of this now, but you can still find old copies of old albums still in good condition. Now, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be perfect, but I mean, even a scratched up CD is still gonna play. Even late 80s and early 90s CD decks, they still have a decent amount of good error correction, and it's partially guessing what it's going to play, but that's just how it works. And you would really never notice the difference, because as long as the CD plays and it doesn't skip, then it's doing its job. It's playing back music, it's media that just works. And for a complete beginner, in fact, if I just had to choose one retro technology to use on a regular basis, which I do use, it would definitely be the CD. I mean, I have a couple of albums inside another CD player right now, and if I just want to play something, all I have to do is press play on the CD deck, and that's it. It just works. Now, the other nice part about CDs is that you can also use these with basically any older PC, with a built-in optical drive, any older laptop, and you can still use this with a modern laptop or really just any PC, as long as you have an external like optical media drive, you can just plug it into the computer. It'll be able to play back the CDs. You can import the CDs onto your PC directly. So whether it be something like iTunes or really just any other application that can do that, and once it imports, then you have a digital copy as well as a physical copy of the media that you have. So it's a really versatile format. Even though it is from 1982, there is still a lot of good support for this, and when you have a digital copy of the music, you can also add it onto your smartphone, or if you want to use like an iPod or something. And speaking of iPods, as tempting as it is to just watch some Y2K video talking about like an iPod Nano, and you just go out and buy the first one you see, as awesome as the iPod lineup is, especially with like the iPod Nano here, unless it's like maybe a 6th or 7th generation model, so like say for example the 6th gen here. Now the one that I have here is still in fantastic condition, but I've also been using this for a long time, so I know that the battery is in okay shape. But if you get a new to you iPod, it's not always going to be a guarantee that the battery is going to work, because these are still like, it's old technology at this point. Apple hasn't made an iPod for a long time now, especially for the iPod Nano lineup. So even though the ones that I have, I know they work, I've also had way more experience with using these devices, and also recently removing the battery from this one directly. So even though it doesn't have a battery inside, I can easily just plug it in and use it as like a local media player. But the iPod lineup itself, if you have no experience with it at all, it's not something that I would immediately recommend, because unless you somehow have a time machine and you can go back to the year 2006 and buy a brand new iPod Nano, chances are the older ones are gonna need some work, because batteries do degrade after all. But if you really want some kind of actual device, I would say that it's easier to recommend an older iPhone, such as the iPhone 4. Now, these are also going to have some kind of battery related issues. Like, I've had my fair share of iPhone 4s with bad batteries. I've even removed some like spicy pillows from old iPhones like this directly. But in general, they are really cool devices, and with something like the iPhone 4 directly, even if it does have a bad battery, it is one of the more easier devices to work on, because to get to the battery, unlike with the iPod Nano here where you have to completely disassemble this, all you have to do is remove the back glass on this and you're right there next to the battery. Now, it is still something that, you know, with old technology like this, you need to be willing to work on it, or at the very least, invest some effort into restoring functionality, which is again why I would say something like the CD itself is a far easier recommendation, because CDs don't have batteries, they don't have like old software that you have to deal with. And while some might say that old software is a disadvantage, I actually like old software. So for me, it works great, but with CDs, it can work with old computers, new computers. You have a lot more flexibility with this format as compared to, say, like using old iTunes or something. Now, I like iTunes a lot, I use it all the time, but again, it is an older application. Another thing about CDs is that there's also a lower barrier of entry as compared to like an actual iPod, because I guess up until a couple of years ago, you could easily get an older iPod for basically next to nothing, but ever since they become more popular again, these are like, you could get a lot of CDs for the price of one iPod. And even though the whole point of an iPod is to have, you know, thousands of songs in your pocket, this isn't like the only way to do this now, because you could also do the same thing with an older iPhone. And even though it's not as easy to upgrade the storage as compared to like with an old iPod like this, you could just get multiple iPhones and use it that way. Now, even though that might not be convenient, again, it's another reason why I think the CD itself is a great thing to start out with. As long as you have a working player, which is like, you can use basically anything. Like I said, you can use an old computer, a new computer, an old DVD player, like even from the 90s. I have a 5-disc CD changer from like 1991, I believe. And once I replaced the belts on it, it can easily play back CDs as if nothing has happened, because even by the late 80s or early 90s, as long as it's a decent deck, it'll work just fine. As awesome as these are, they're just not as easy to work on. This is just more of a mechanical format in nature. It's awesome. Now don't get me wrong, cassettes are really cool, and you can also make mixtapes with this, but you can also make a mix CD with CDs, because you could just get a blank CDR and make a custom track list and everything like that. But with cassettes, you shouldn't be expecting like CD grade audio, because first of all, it's a cassette. Even though it was technically possible with some of the like really high-end units from back in the day, they were high-end units, and chances are they're just going to be as difficult to find as they were back then. The other thing about cassettes is that if you get an old system from like, the 80s, 90s, potentially even the 2000s at this point, more likely than not, it's going to need some kind of repair, because usually most of the time they used a belt-driven mechanism, and over time the belt itself degrades. Now this isn't a cassette-only issue, like I said, it is also relatively common on CD decks, depending on the type of mechanism that they use to transport the disc. In my case, like I said, it was a 5-disc changer, and it used a belt to rotate the actual platter, but that doesn't affect the actual like laser mechanism. This though is like, if you don't have a usable belt, it's just going to eat your cassette. If you're lucky enough to have like a really high-end unit, then that's awesome. And with a proper cassette setup, you can still get really good sound quality out of these, but if you buy like a brand new system, it's not going to be as good as they once were. Like even in the early 2000s, for example, like there were some really awesome Sony Walkmans, and then once the cassette started to just be considered obsolete, all of that awesome technology was just basically gone to time, which is ridiculous, because these can sound awesome. You can have a really slim mechanism with this and still have perfect playback, but nowadays it's all just like knockoffs of knockoffs, and it's not the same as it was. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't collect cassettes. It's just a cool way to listen to music, but if you want an easier, like problem-free, for the most part, experience, CDs are still the way to go. But I will admit that it is pretty cool to have a translucent cassette of Backstreet Boys, because like this is peak Y2K, right? So to show you guys just how easy it is to play back a CD, we are at the Retro Sony Entertainment System here, and if you guys want to see everything here in detail, we actually have a dedicated video about the entire setup, as like just everything set up. And there is also a lot of cool technology to talk about here, such as CRT displays and, retro game consoles and all of that awesome stuff. But to continue with the topic of physical media, we're mainly going to focus on awesome technologies such as actual DVD players. This one is from the year 2000. We also have PlayStations, because you can use older PlayStations to play back CDs. So the PS1 can play CDs. The PS2, which is what we have here, at least the slim variant, can play back CDs as well as DVDs. And if you have a PS3, well, it basically does everything, because it can do everything that this does, as well as Blu-rays. So yeah, I mean, if you want like the best, at least for the older stuff, you can't go wrong with the PS3. So this right here is just one example of a DVD player that you can find. Like, there are a lot of older DVD players that, I mean, you could probably get them for next to nothing, just like the CDs themselves. And even though this was the latest and greatest at one point, the advantage of it not being 2004 anymore is that you can easily pick up one of these. There's really very little that can go wrong with like a standard DVD player. Obviously, it's not always going to be perfect. I mean, chances are there could be some issues with like the power supply or the laser assembly or whatever, but generally these are going to have like more reliability compared to a VCR or something that's just more mechanical in nature. And of course, you don't have to use just a DVD player. You can still use a newer one or even an older one or just a CD player alone. This one, because like I said, it's from the year 2000, it doesn't even have HDMI. The nice part about having a retro setup like this is that I can easily use an analog display with this, because this has built-in analog output. And in fact, I guess you could say this is actually more versatile compared to some other units, because not only do you have audio output, you actually have two sets of it. This actually could be really useful if you want to record a CD onto like a tape or something. So you have multiple audio outputs, which is awesome, but you also have multiple different digital outputs. So you have both the coaxial type and optical. So depending on whatever your setup is, you have a lot of different options here. Again, you're not just limited to analog, you have digital right here. And because it is of course a DVD player, you also have composite, S-video, and component. And the cool part about these two outputs is that just like the analog audio output, you can simultaneously output this to two different displays. This is a really cool unit, and we also have a matching remote. That's another advantage of a DVD player. And if you have other Sony equipment from the time, or depending on whatever the setup is, you could probably use the same remote to control other components. In this case, it is of course for a Sony, so you could control the TV input, the TV volume, you could power on or off the TV directly from this. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this. Of course, it makes for a great DVD player. So let's go ahead and set this up real quick. The cool part about this player is that it also has different indicators for the medium that it's playing back. So CDs, DVDs, and even video CDs, which, yeah, those exist. It's exactly what it says. It's video, but on a CD. So it says it right here, DVD, CD, and video CD player, component video output, as well as virtual enhanced surround. Year 2000 technology. Keeping in theme with the year 2000, we have this awesome just background with clouds and futuristic DVD designs. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. And of course, to listen back to our CDs, we have our Sony Power Cinema VCR system. Now obviously you don't need to have this specifically. You can have either an amplifier or just connect the DVD player up to the TV directly. Or alternatively, if you have just like a stereo system, you can just use the analog output directly. Again, this is very setup dependent, but this is what I'm using here. The cool part about this is that it's a VCR and an amplifier in one. We also have a 5-disc CD changer. Now there are also 5-disc DVD changers which do the exact same thing, but you know, they can also play back DVDs. But this one, like I said earlier, is from 1991, and once I replaced the belts on it, it works great. So once you have some CDs as well as a player that works, all you have to do is put the CD in the player and start listening to music. Because, like I said, this is pretty much like one of the easiest formats that you can use. It is also player dependent on if there's anything on screen. Now in this case we just have the ethereal cloud background, which is awesome. And of course, just like with DVD or really any other digital format, you can pause, you can play back immediately, you can skip tracks. You don't need to rewind it like a cassette, but that's not exactly something that you really care about if you're going to use cassettes anyway. So yeah, that was like a selling point maybe back in 1985, but not so much nowadays. Still though, I mean, this is just a really solid format. The fact that it survived this, like all this time, from 1982 up until now, and they're still using it as like the standard for audio. You have decades upon decades of support. It just continues to work. Thankfully, this is like way before the Blu-ray era with all the online extra, you know, nonsense essentially. So you can easily use this offline. And as for the on-screen TV display, I know I said that there's nothing on screen, but when you press display on the player itself or on the remote, there is actually an on-screen display. So in some cases, even though something isn't there, you just need to actually activate it on the unit itself. But again, it doesn't really matter if you don't connect it up to a TV in the first place. And to wrap things up with the physical media side of things, of course with a DVD player you can also play back DVDs. And the nice part about this is because, you know, it's still an older format. It's from, what, 1996, 1997. You don't need an internet connection or anything ridiculous for this to play. I mean, it'll work in a player from the year 2000. The nice part about it is that you also don't have to use an older player. You can still use a newer Blu-ray or even just a newer DVD player. And if they have HDMI, if they have a good upscaler, they can still provide a really solid picture for a high definition display. Now on the flip side, VHS, it's also a really cool format, but it just won't be the best for an HD display. Now, if you have a CRT display to watch them on, then it's a whole different thing because they were designed to work on CRTs back in the day, and well, what do you know? If you watch it on a CRT, it's still going to look really good. Now, I'm sure you could also get away with watching it on a smaller LCD display, but this is still an analog format, and the CRT does a good job of hiding imperfections. But even with that aside, one big issue of VHS is that if it wasn't stored properly in a cool, dry area, then there is a chance it may have mold. Now, this will be really obvious on the tape itself if it has, like, you know, just mold on the tape. But if you do see a tape like that, then you never want to put it inside a VCR because it's going to be really annoying to clean up. It can go from one tape to another and just cause even further problems. Now, it is possible to fix moldy tapes, but it's very time consuming. But the other part about this is that the players themselves are also not exactly new technology. Now, there were players made up until like the late 2000s, maybe the early 2010s, so you could probably still find a newer player available, like maybe a DVD combo unit, so one side would be DVD, the other side would be VHS. But if something breaks on it, then you either have to repair it or find a place to repair the player or just get another player entirely, and it's also not a guarantee that it'll also work because it's just a more mechanical format. With a DVD player, if it doesn't read a DVD, then it's either like, you know, something with the laser assembly or something with the logic board, or if it doesn't power up at all, then it's probably a power supply issue. Like, you can easily diagnose the issues on a DVD player. With this, unless you repaired them back in the day, then yeah, it's going to take a bit more work to make them fully functional. Now, I'm not saying that this is like a bad format. It is still really cool to have VHS, to watch VHS movies, and use a VCR because they're called VCRs for a reason, because they can record onto VHS, which is also really cool. But basically, you just have to keep in mind that this is still older technology. There is a lot of useful tips and information online, especially with YouTube, in terms of repairing a VCR deck or things like that. But if you just want like an easier experience, then you can't go wrong with a DVD as well as CDs. The other thing about VHS is that, you know, this is a linear format. It's not like you can just skip around with a DVD, go from track to track, or even have like bonus features. And of course you have to physically rewind this, but it's just an older format. That's just how it is. So even though technically this is a superior format just based on the tech specs, I guess the most important thing is mainly just have fun with these older formats. The whole point is to experience something new if you've never used them. Even though old tech is awesome, it wasn't always perfect, but at least the tech that has survived has proven that it isn't just modern slop. Like, this wasn't exactly a super cheap thing to get back in the day because DVD was still high-end new technology, and as you would expect, it still has a decent build quality. And of course, this is still just the beginning because there were a lot of other formats that existed. Yes, these were definitely more popular, but these don't necessarily have to be your only options, or at the very least, like, if you want to try something else apart from a CD, other options do exist. But again, the whole point of today's video was, if you've never used any retro technology, then something as simple as the compact disc or even DVDs are a pretty solid way to start off a collection, because all you have to do is put in the CD in the player directly and it just works. It really can't be any simpler than this because it's basically as plug and play of a format as it'll be. If this video helped you out, then leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed today's video, then consider leaving a thumbs up. If you want to see even more videos on retro tech, then just check out the channel. We've always got some kind of retro tech in use here, and it may provide even more information if you want to start using retro tech yourself. If so, then consider subscribing. But that's it for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.